Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. Good evening to one and all.
Yes.
Now we would today start today's webinar. I would first request our chairman AIFTP West Zone Bhaskar Bhai Patel to deliver his welcome speech. Bhaskar Bhai Patel, please.
First of all, our today's speaker, Mr. Samir Divetia, Advocate, Gujarat High Court, Secretary General, All India Federation of Tax Practitioners, Mr. Samir Jani, our Senior Advocate, Mr. Saurabh Soparkar, Sri Upendra Bhatt, Past President, All Gujarat Federation of Tax Practitioners, Mr. Akshat Vyas, the member of AIFTP as well, the National Action Committee convener, all past president and NEC member of All India Federation of Tax Practitioners, the members and all the office bearers and managing committee members of AIFTP West Zone, all the respected participants in this webinar. I welcome you, all of you, at this sixth webinar organized by AIFTP West Zone on direct tax on the topic of new turf, new rules under Income Tax Act regarding penalties. The topic will be dealt by our today's learned speaker, Mr. Samir Divetia, who is a well-known advocate on direct taxes, appeared before Honorable ITAT as well as Gujarat High Court. With these few words, I welcome you all again in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I would request Samir Bhai Jani, Secretary General of AIFTP, to introduce the subject. Thank you, sir. Samir Bhai Jani.
Well, at the outset, we recognize the presence of respected Sri Saurabh Bhai. When Samir Bhai was to deliver the paper, he felt that I should join and share about his knowledge also. Today's paper is income tax penalty, new turf and new rules. Samir Bhai Divetia would be dealing with new penalties like 270A, AA. With this, I would also request him, if possible, to deal with the new rules, or rather, not the new rules, but the old set norms of Supreme Court, or the law of the land. To what extent it has been unturned, and they are no more a good law, if they are. I would not take much time of the participants. I hand over to the moderator once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Upendra Bhai Bhatt is going to introduce the speaker. He is with us, but just we are unable to unmute because his name is not clear. I'm just wait. But sir, if you can put it in chat. He is with us, but the name written in the meeting is not true.
If he is hearing our communication,
okay,
then let him start.
No, but he is muted.
I have to unmute, no, sir.
Oh,
Yeah.
Galaxy J7 Pro.
Okay, okay, sir. Sir, Upendra Bhatt sir is unmuted. Please, sir.
okay.
Upendra Bhai, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, I am thankful to my dearest friends, Mr. Samir Jani, Bhaskar Patel, and other office bearers of All India Federation of Tax Practitioners for giving me this opportunity to give introduction of today's speaker. About his academic career, he got his BCom degree in the year 1971 from prestigious institution HL College of Commerce. He obtained his CA degree in the year 1974. Meanwhile, He obtained his LLB degree from Sir Elisa Law College within 3 years, and afterwards his master degree in LLM from the same college, Sir Elisa Law College. He obtained distinction in all the exams in which he appeared for CA as well as law, LLB or LLM. Regarding his practice, no sooner he obtained the degrees, he started his practice before Gujarat High Court and Appellate Tribunal. He is also often appearing in Supreme Court also. He is appearing in Ahmedabad, Bombay, Chennai and other ITETs. He was a regular columnist in CTR. His articles are also published in many other law journals. Regarding his association activities, he was president of ITET Bar Association for the year 2012 to 2014. Again, he has been appointed as vice president of ITET Bar and he will become president soon, and his tenure will be for 2 years. Regarding his other activities, he is a trustee in many trusts. He is fond of music. He is an excellent swimmer. He has obtained medals and he is obtaining since last 20 years. His landmark decisions, he has appeared in many matters and to his credit, he has many landmark decisions. He is fond of teaching. He was a visiting faculty in Sir Elisa Law College for 25 years. He was teaching income tax, family laws like HUF, Specific Relief Act, interpretation of statutes, Partnership Act, Company Act. He has been invited to give his talk in seminars, symposiums, workshop, meeting at various places in Gujarat as well as Mumbai, Solapur, etc. His father was also well-known advocate of Gujarat High Court, Mr. Niranjan Divetia. His wife is also Sangeet Visarat, and house in Ahmedabad city is a heritage property. People visit his residence. With this brief introduction, I present before this August gathering Mr. Samir Devetia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Upendra Bhatt, sir. Sir, I would request now Samir Devetia, sir, to take over the proceedings, sir. Thank you.
Respected office bearers, are you audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Respected office bearers of the AIFTP, my dear friend and legal luminary Shri Saurabh Bhai Soparkar, other office bearers of the sister associations, and dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I am thankful to the Federation for giving me the opportunity and to have a new experience of a webinar in the period of lockdown. Whatever Shri Upendra Bhai has said, I think it has come, if at all it is true, at a good moment because my wife is listening to it. So I will have some benefit in the, not home from work, but home at work. It is what I feel it. But I will just point out that he has made a prediction about the next year's, the office bearership in our association at ITET Bar, that I'm not agreeable to it. With this, now let me turn. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the entire human beings all over the world. It has brought sorrow, grief, pains, and sufferings to the mankind, apart from economic, social, and psychological loss. COVID-19, however, the COVID-19 adversity has also brought an opportunity to the mankind, and especially the professionals like us have successfully and smoothly switched over to the modern technology, which would otherwise have been very difficult, if not opposed to it, and that too in such a short time. The recourse to the webinar has been has given a tremendous opportunity to interact with the fellow professionals all over India and share our knowledge, which would have been not possible. And it is also increasing our professional skill and competence during the period of lockdown. Under the present circumstances, everyone is attempting to adjust himself to the new order in life. The revenue and judiciary are not lagging behind in adjusting to themselves to this order by resorting to the new technology by way of virtual hearing and other things. Therefore, when I was asked by the organizers to select a topic for today's discussion, I thought that I should also have a new NEA subject for discussion. And I could find that the penalty provisions which have been introduced in the Income Tax Act from couple of years and till this last 2020 budget requires consideration. And therefore, the subject I have selected is the penalty new turf, new rules. And the next slide, from the next slide, I think you will be able to understand that I think why it was going up. I will need to adjust it. Yes, as this one. The second slide itself indicates that the old turf of 271C will not be now useful to us from the assessment year 17-18, and therefore we should discuss the new rules which would be applicable from 2017-18, assessment year 17-18. And this has also assumed great importance after the, I would call it, high-pitch assessment made in the assessment for assessment year 17-18 due to the demonetization of the currency on 8th November 2016. So this has made the study of the new provisions mandatory, at least I would say, for us. First of all, let me give you the background of the provisions, or I will say that I will be dealing 3 provisions in detail. That is 270 capital A. The fallout of the 270 capital A is 270 AA. Then 270 AAC capital. Then 271 AAD capital. So these 4 provisions I will discuss today and throw open to you for discussion on the basis of whatever the points which I feel that require discussion by this August gathering. Now, if I go to the legislative object or history behind the provisions of section 270 capital A, then you will find from this sheet that while moving the budget, the Honorable Finance Minister pointed out that the old turf had given rise to a heavy penalty which was being contested or disputed for years together, and it was a matter of great difference in so far as interpretation of the statutory provisions was concerned. And if I quote from the speech of the Honorable Finance Minister, at present the income tax officer has discretion to levy penalty at a rate of 100% to 300% of the tax sought to be evaded. I propose to modify the entire scheme of penalty by providing different categories of misdemeanors with the graded penalty, and thereby substantially reducing the discretionary power of the tax officer. Then, then the other aspects are not material, so I leave it there. And now I will come to the provisions of section 270 capital A. The fourth sheet says that what is in nutshell is the first provision, that is subsection 1, because there are in all, if I say, then 12 subsections to section 270A. So my endeavor would be the first to give the highlight of the provisions of section 271A to 271A11, and then go to the finer aspects of this provision. Now, first the subsection 1, if I read out, then it says the assessing officer, the commissioner appeals, principal commissioner or commissioner may, during the course of any proceedings under these Act, direct that any person who has underreported his income shall be liable to pay a penalty in addition to tax, if any, on the unreported income. Now, if you look at the site, then what the emphasis I want to give is that the first is the authorities. The authorities are the assessing officer, the CIT appeals, CIT, or the PRCIT. Secondly, any of them may, the third word is direct. Fourth important expression is during the course of any proceedings, and direct to whom? The person who is underreported his income, that is next. And direction would be to pay penalty in addition to the tax on what? The unreported income. Therefore, we have to study this, all the four things under subsection 1 of section 270 capital A. The detailed discussion on these expressions, may and direct, I will come to it later on. But I will first of all take you to the expressions are a person who has underreported his income. Now this expression has been considered in subsection 2 of section 270 capital A, and it says that a person shall be considered to have underreported income. If I put it shortly, as per the next slide on page, that is page, you will find it on, yes, that is on page 5, that it is a difference between the assessed income and the returned income, or if no return is filed, then the zero income, that whenever there is a variance between these two, if I put it in a short, without going into the niceties or the technical words, then that variance or the difference is there, then that person shall be considered to have underreported income. So the person who is liable to pay penalty is the person who has underreported income. Therefore, the person who has underreported income is a person in whose case the assessment or reassessment or second reassessment or revision or whatever it may be has resulted into a variation between his returned income, if return is filed, and if return is not filed, then the income which is not chargeable to tax, that is exemption limit if it is a case of an individual HUF, or otherwise zero if it is a company or HUF or LLP. So if that mere variance would make him the person who will be considered as underreported the income. Now, what the underreported income has to, what is the amount of underreported income, that is very important. A person, you have come to know that subsection 2 is the person who has unreported. Subsection 3 says that the amount of unreported income, that calculation is given. And friends, it is a mathematical calculation. But in brief, if you ask me, then it is pointed out in my, this sheet is, yes, it is pointed out in this aspect that it was the difference between the assessed income and the difference between the assessed income and written income. By written income, I means the income which is processed under section 143(1). But the aspect of the difference between the written income and the income processed, if there is a variation, then what would be the result, that I will refer to it little later. But here, for the sake of our discussion, I will point out that if there is a variation between the returned income and the assessed income, that the difference would be the amount or the quantum of unreported income. So if I read out now subsection 1, then the three authorities, any of the three authorities may direct which person who has underreported. That means a person in whose case there is a variation between his assessed income and returned income, then that person would be directed, and he would be directed to what? He would be directed to levy penalty. And on what penalty? The underreported income, by which, as per subsection 3, means the difference between the returned income and the assessed income. That is how it stands. Now the next important provision 4 and 5 of I skip for the purpose of present discussion. I will come to it later on. What is important is subsection 6. Now subsection 6, before that you require to consider that under section 270A, the underreported income is divided into two things. One, underreported income is a simpliciter, and the underreported income, which is in consequence results into a misreporting of income. So the unreported income URI simpliciter and the misreported income, there are two distinct compartments have been made because each of them will result into a different amount of penalty. So we will have to now study that what is the underreported income and what is the misreported income. Now, so far as underreported income, you have already understood that the difference between the assessed income and return income in a nutshell, but certain variation even out of this difference is to be excluded in view of subsection 6. If you look at subsection 6, that if I go to my slide, oh, I'm not getting it here. Yes, subsection 6 says that while computing the undisclosed income, underreported income, you have to exclude certain types of income which is made by way of addition or disallowance. Now there are in all 4 clauses which are to be exclusion clause from the computation of unreported income. The first one is, because these exclusions are very important when we will come to the discussion over the what could be the subject matter of penalty under this new regime of the 270 capital A. The first exclusion is the amount of income in respect of which the assessee offers explanation and the authority is satisfied that the explanation is bona fide and the assessee has disclosed all material facts to substantiate this explanation. Now pausing here for a moment, this explanation I can say that is similar to the explanation which you used to find in section 271 while the penalty under section 271(c) was being was levied. Explanation 2 was also of the same wording. Then it means that the assessee should offer an explanation, and that qua that explanation the authority should be satisfied that it is bona fide, and secondly the assessee has disclosed all material facts to substantiate this explanation. The second clause says that if the underreported income arises on account of estimate made by the assessing officer, then if the estimate of income is on account of the not rejection of books of accounts, but the method of accounting followed by the assessee, then to that extent, that difference would be excluded. If I give you an example, suppose there is a unreported income, that is the difference between the assessed income and of 10 lakhs. Some additions are made to aggregating to rupees 10 lakhs in the assessment under 143(3). Now, if I examine the nomenclature or the nature of the additions made by the assessing officer, and I find that out of the 10 lakhs, 5 lakhs is an addition to on account of the estimate made by the assessing officer on account of rejection of the method of accounting, then that 5 lakhs is to be excluded, and only that 5 lakhs would be the unreported income for the purpose of this provision. So even though the total addition is of 10 lakhs, that is the difference between assessed income and the returned income, the entire 10 lakhs rupees, as we understood in subsection 2, that will not be undisclosed income, but the 5 lakhs would be excluded as per this exclusion clause under subsection 6, and 5 lakhs rupees would be the unreported income that would be subject matter of levy as per subsection 1. Now the third clause says that when unreported income is on the basis of estimate, But that estimate is not on account of this, the rejection of the method of accounting, but because you make an estimate, that is an assessee makes an estimated X figure, while the assessing officer increases it to Y figure. So because of the difference between Y and X, whatever is the unreported income, that unreported income will be excluded and no penalty would be exigible on that. Let us take the same example. Out of 10 lakhs rupees of the difference, 5 lakhs rupees was on account of the rejection of method of accounting. Now still 3 lakhs rupees is the estimated addition on account of, say, personal expenses of the partners towards the, say, motor car or electricity or whatever it may be. The assessee had already disallowed 1 lakh rupees. Or to take another example, 14A disallowance. The assessee has suo moto made a disallowance of 1 lakh. It has been increased to, say, 2 lakhs rupees. Now the variation of 1 lakh rupees between the estimate of 2 lakhs and 1 lakh qua this 14A or the personal expenses disallowance, that would not be subject matter of penalty by way on account of the exclusion clause, clause C of the subsection 6 of 270 capital A. Then last is on account of transfer pricing. Now when there is a case of a transfer pricing and the variation in the unreported income is on account of the ALP, but the assessee has maintained the information and documents as prescribed in the 92D and declared that the international transaction and disclose all material facts, that is pari material to the clause A, which we just now have seen. So if the assessee has disclosed all the material facts relating to that TP transaction and still there is a variation on account of that TP transaction, then that has to be excluded of the transaction and all material facts by the assessee, and the balance addition qua that TP amount would be subject matter of the penalty being as a unreported income. And the last one is the amount of undisclosed income referred to in 271AA-B. Now, if you recall, the section 271AA-B relates to the penalty in case of search cases. Now, in case of a search cases, when it is a specified year, then in that year, the penalty is governed by the provisions of section 271 capital B. Now, the specified year is there are 2 years. That is the immediately preceding year from the date of the search if the due date of the filing of the return is not expired and the assessee has not filed the return. And secondly, that broken period, say for example, the search has taken place on, say, 15th May 2019, then the year ended on 31st March 2019. If the person who is searched has not filed the return for 1920, then that year N plus first, and so also the broken period from 1st April 19 to the 15th May 2019, that would be the specified year, and whatever income you declare and you paid and you fulfill the conditions of 271AA-B, then the penalty would be governed by that provision and it will not be subject matter of the penalty under this. The result of this clause, I will come to it later on when I will discuss the specific situations. Just now, I am just giving the brief outline of this provision. Now comes the subsection 7 says that the penalty shall be amount equal to 50% of the amount of tax payable on the unreported income. Now, subsection 7 quantifies the penalty. It quantifies the penalty as a 50% of the amount of tax payable on the unreported income. Now, what is unreported income? We have already ascertained that the difference between assessed income and written income, and that difference of 10 lakhs minus the exclusion of subsection 6, say for example 5 lakhs. Now 5 lakhs is the unreported income. If that is a unreported income simpliciter, then that amount would be liable to penalty at 50% of the amount of tax payable. So the question will arise, what is the amount of tax payable? To ascertain the amount of tax payable, we will have to go to subsection 10 of 270 capital A. Now, the tax payable, friends, in short, is whatever is the difference between the assessed income and returned income, you work it out, and whatever comes the difference by the reducing the undisclosed income, that is the tax payable, and on that you will have to pay 50% by way of penalty in the case of the unreported income. So that is qua the unreported income simpliciter. Now, why do I use the word unreported income simpliciter? For this reason, that if you go to the next subsection, subsection 8, subsection 8 says that even if whenever there is an unreported income, say of 10 lakhs, in our example, if that 10 lakhs rupees, there is certain elements which we can say that in a loose terms, the concealed income, then that would be the misreporting of income. Now, let me explain to you in terms of this provision. Now, this, if I read subsection 8 and 9 together, it says that whatever is the unreported income, if that unreported income is in consequence of misreporting, as a result of these situations which are given in subsection 9, then that amount would be the income and it would be liable to penalty equal to 200% of the amount of tax payable. Now let us understand this provision. It says that you first arrive at the unreported income, then from unreported income you arrive at the misreported income. Now what is misreported income? The elements or the situations or the items which are given in subsection 9, that if there are elements of subsection 9, then qua that the addition or the unreported income, it would be treated as a misreported income. So MRI is a component of undisclosed income, but the character or the contents of the MRI is different. It is a income which has a bearing or the elements of subsection 9. Now, that MRI would be liable to penalty at a higher percentage of 300% of the tax payable. Here the tax payable is the same as given in subsection 10. So whatever is the tax payable, and that 300% qua that misreported income that is tax payable, you will have to pay by your penalty. The ultimate situation is that the entire variation between the assessed income and the return income is, in a given case, is broken into two pieces, or it is, that is unreported income simpliciter, then the misreported income, qua the unreported income that is remaining after the exclusions of subsection 6, that is subjected to penalty at say 50% of the tax payable, whereas in case of the MRI, it would be liable to penalty at 200% of the tax payable on that unreported income. That is how the penalty provisions function. Now I come to the subsection 9, that under what circumstances or when what are the situations under which the unreported income would be considered as a misreported income. The first item is the if you go to slide number 12, then misrepresentation or suppression of fact. Now what is misrepresentation and suppression? That requires a study, and it is, I think, a very long subject, because one will have to just understand that what is misrepresentation. Now misrepresentation, if I go to the dictionary meaning, then it is an action or offense of giving a false or misleading account of the nature of something. It is a false statement of fact and not of opinion. It should be a false statement of fact. That is very important. And so far as this suppression of fact is concerned, it means the action of keeping secret, refusal to disclose or reveal. As per the KG Ayers dictionary, it means failure to disclose full information with the intent to evade payment of tax. So willful non-disclosure of facts is a important element when you have to call it a suppression of fact. Now friends, even the misrepresentation of fact, if I go to section 18 of the Indian Contract Act, then there are 3 types of misrepresentation, because you will have to just keep in mind when a situation arises where you giving a reply to the notice where the assessing officer alleges that there is misrepresentation of the there is a misreported income. The first is a fraudulent misrepresentation. Fraudulent misrepresentation will happen when a false representation is made and the party making representation, let's say X, knew it to be false or was reckless as to whether, and lack of accurate belief in its truth will present it a fraudulent one. So the false representation and the party making was knowing that it was false or it was recklessly made. Then second is negligent misrepresentation. Negligent misrepresentation under the Misrepresentation Act 1967 falls where a declaration is made by one contracting party to another negligently or without reasonable grounds for believing it to be true. So I am not believing it to be true, but still I make to the contracting party, then it is a negligent misrepresentation. And the last is innocent misrepresentation. Misrepresentation made completely without fault can be described as an innocent misrepresentation. So this is how I think one will have to keep in mind that what is a misrepresentation and what is a suppression of fact. Because when we will come to the additions towards the additions under section 68 or 69 or other provisions or some disallowances of the expenses, I think the assessing officer merely on account of addition or disallowance is likely to treat it as a misrepresentation or suppression of fact. Now the second item is failure to record investment in books of accounts. Now I think this is a very funny thing which has been included under this subclause 9. If there is a failure to record investment in books of accounts, that is when you apply section 69, you very well know that there are separate provisions of section 271AA(c) which will come into play and the penalty, but still it has been included under this the subsection 9. And what would be the implication that we will discuss at the time of discussing the issue arising out of this 270 capital A. The third is claim of expenditure not substantiated by any evidence. Now third refers to the expenditure, and which expenditure? Which is not substantiated by any evidence. So two things are required to be present before such a claim of expenditure could be regarded as a misreporting of income. It should not have been, it could not be substantiated, and second, substantiated by any evidence. I emphasize the word any. That means if there is a total lack of evidence to substantiate the claim of expenditure. Say for example, I have debited the commission expenses. Now I am not able to give any proof or evidence to substantiate the claim of the deductions made towards these say for example that the commission income. Even I have not made TDS also, nothing doing, and I just make a entry and pay a vouchers. Now when these are examined, an assessing officer makes an addition, and that variation between the assessed income and returned income is on account of the disallowance of that commission expenses. The question will arise whether the claim of this expenditure would fall under this subclause 3 of the clause subsection 9 of 270 capital A. The test to be satisfied is whether I have made a claim. Yes, I have made a claim on expenditure by debiting to P&L account, and by that route I have returned the income as per the P&L account. Secondly, I have failed to substantiate it, and not only failed, but I have failed to produce any evidence to prove that this expenditure has been that commission expenses is given to anyone. So if you are in position to substantiate by some evidence, then you will be out of this clause. But mind well, you will be out of this clause, that is subsection 9 towards misreporting of the income. But that will not make you out of the unreported income, because the steps are the difference between written income and assessed income. And out of that difference, a part is misreported MRI. Now in MRI, you will get out under sheeting your claim of commission expenses, but that will not make you out of the unreported income. Still, you have to cross the hurdle of referring to subsection 6. And if you get out from subsection 6, then the penalty will not be exigible under 270 capital A. Then next comes recording of a false entry in books of accounts. Now friends, so far as this item is concerned, I will reserve it for discussion when I will come to section 271 AAD, because it has got some bearing on it. Then fifth is failure to record any receipt in books of accounts which has a bearing on the total income. This is also a bearing on 270 AAD. Therefore, these two items will discuss along with this, so that we can have a complete view of these provisions of 270 capital A with vis-a-vis 271 AAD. Then the sixth one is failure to report any international transaction or deemed international transaction or specified domestic transaction. Friends, here I would like to point out that if there is an absolute failure to report it, then that addition by way of this TP transaction would be subject matter of the misreporting of income. Now here what is important is that three items are included: any international transaction, then deemed international transaction, and the specified domestic transaction. But if you have marked the clause D of the subsection 6, that is a variation between the assessed income and the written income resulting into the underreported income. In that case, these two items, that is a deemed international transaction and the specified domestic transactions, have not been included, even though you have fully disclosed the facts relating to this transaction in the concerned report and otherwise. So friends, this requires to be reconciled. Now these are the 6 cases of misreporting, and I believe that this is an exhaustive the items which would constitute the misreporting of income, and unless you fall under any of the 6 clause, then it cannot be said to be a case of a misreporting of income. Now with this I come to the clause number 11. Clause number 11 says that, I think it is also a very, but before that I will go to the slide number 14, where I have considered the issue relating to 115 JB and JC. Now in short, the situation is this, that when you are assessed under JB or JC, then that difference is liable to be considered as an unreported income. But if I read out very closely, then it makes some sense. The exclusion of the cases under 270 A capital A6 relating to URI include unreported income referring to TP order only if the SSE has maintained information and documents as per 92D, declared international transaction and disclosed all material facts relating to it, which I have already disclosed, that if you have disclosed the particulars relating to international transaction, then it would be excluded in computing the unreported income under subsection 6. But the exclusion does not cover deemed international transaction and specified domestic, as just now I have discussed. Then subsection 2 provides that the amount exceeding maximum amount not chargeable to tax shall be the case of URI, and the quantum of URI shall be computed as per 270 capital A3, that is the difference as we just now discussed. But my point is that how there could be a case of JC unless you file the return. Under JC, you know that you have to make a claim. And unless you make a claim, how you can make a claim? It should be under section 10. It is only 1 is mentioned, but it is a claim under 10AA or deductions under chapter 6A. So when there is alternative, this ALP has been to be considered for JC. I think some computation is required to be made under subsection 10 of the subsection 10, which deals with the tax payable on the unreported income. Because when I come to the subsection 10, it only covers the situation of the difference between assessed income and returned income or no return income, and the difference between X and Y formula, that is regarding 3.3 and 143.1. But it is silent about JB and JC. And that is why I have posed this question. Now coming to the next slide, that is slide number 17, that I will deal with subsequently. It's a separate provision, 270 capital A immunity provision. But before that, let me complete subsection 11. Now subsection 11 says that when any addition or disallowance is the subject matter of the imposition of penalty is a unreported income or a misreported income, then same addition would not be the subject matter of penalty in case of that same person or in any other assessment year. Now I fail to appreciate that in the case of a same person, how the same item could be a subject matter of addition twice over, unless it is a case under 271(8)(d). Otherwise, I don't think it can be a subject matter of double addition. And for any other assessment year. Now, in any other assessment year, I presume that it has been incorporated, keeping in mind subsection 4 and 5, which I had not discussed while discussing the subsections of section 270 capital A. Now, put it shortly, friends, you very well know that when a addition is made, say for example, intangible addition by way of GP is made in year number 1, and in a subsequent year number 2 or 3, you claim that whatever credit I have introduced in my books of accounts, and which is subject matter of addition in the year number 2 and 3, is the result of the addition made by you in the year number 1. That means the source of the credit in year number 2 and 3 is the addition made in year number 1 by way of an intangible addition or otherwise. Now, when you make an explanation like this, you had explanation 2 under the old provisions of 271C, whereby the penalty was to be imposed when you are making such a telescoping of the income, the addition towards the income in subsequent year. Now, when it comes to 270 capital A, subsection 4 and 5, in short, provide for such a situation. But if you closely look at it, then the example which I have given, is like this. Say, for example, in the assessment year, we are concerned with 2017-18. The SSE says that whatever addition you make towards the, say, cash credit, I am taking addition towards cash credit for a simple and not going into niceties of 272A, because issue will arise for that penalty provision. But for the sake of explanation or my example, I say that if I explain that cash credit in the year number, the assessment year 17-18, addition made by you in 2016-17, then in 17-18, no addition, this difference would be disregarded. But in 16-17, if it is possible, then penalty would be levied under section 270(11)(c) read with explanation 2. Now, in case of this 270A read with subsection 4 and 5, the situation is slightly different. Say, for example, in the assessment year 1920, some addition is made by the assessing officer. You explain that this addition is on account of addition made in 17-18, and that I have introduced in 1920. Now the year of 90, if the penalty is not levied in say 1718, the penalty would be levied in 1718 and not in 1920 when the addition or is made, and this has resulted into unreported income, because there is a variation between the assessed income and returned income. So if the penalty is not levied in year number 1, then that year number 1 would be liable to penalty because of subsection 4 and 5. But the question is that under the old regime, there was a provision of section 271(1)(a), whereby the assessing officer had a power to levy penalty under that section in the year number 1. But when I come to 270(a), I find that there is no analogous provision to this 271(1)(a), whereby he can go to section 270(a) for assessment year 2017-18. And second difficulty would be that if I go to section the time barring provisions 275, suppose the time limit has expired for 17-18, and because in 1920 the assessing officer came to know that look, the addition you are explaining by way of the addition made in the earlier year. Now how we can take a recourse to 17-18? Because the time limit has already expired. So these two things required to be done when the provisions are considered, or rather unreported income is qua the subsection 4 and 5. Now friends, before going to these questions regarding this 270(a), I will explain a corollary of this 270(a), that is 270(a), the immunity provision, because they are very important. Yes, 270(a) in nutshell says that, if I read out from the sheet which I have already given, that assess the first is it is the new subsection 270(a) provides for an immunity from penalty under 270(a) as well as prosecution under 276(c). The conditions for the immunity are the assessing officer, the SSC may make an application to assessing officer for grant of immunity from imposition of penalty under section 270(a). So the first thing is the SSC has to make an application to the AO who has assessed him and initiated the proceedings under section 270(a) for granting this immunity. Secondly, intimation of the proceedings under that is for this, provided the conditions are he pays the tax and interest payable assessment within the period specified in such notice of demand and does not prefer an appeal against such assessment order. Yes? Yes. Now the friends, there are two conditions. The first condition is that whatever is the demand raised as per the demand notice 156 towards the interest and payable in consequence to that assessment, which is giving rise to penalty proceedings under 270(a), the SSC must pay the tax and interest as raised by that demand notice, and within the period specified in that notice, that is 30 days, or if a shorter period, joint CIT or additional CIT, whatever is applicable. And second condition is that he should not prefer an appeal against the assessment order. So these are the two conditions. If you fulfill and you make an application, you will be granted immunity under 270(a). Now, the time limit for making application, the SSC can make an application within 1 month from the end of the month in which the order of assessment or reassessment is received. So the time limit for making application is that you have to calculate the end of the assessment or the end of the month in which the assessment order is received, and within 1 month, because in 35 days you have to pay the money, or 30 days. Therefore, 1 month more is given for making this application for immunity under 270(a). Then second is conditions for grant of immunity have to be fulfilled, and if they are fulfilled, then you will be granted immunity and from penalty under 270(a) and 276. Now, the time limit for passing the orders and other subsections under 270(a). Now, this causes a great difficulty in availing the benefit which is supposed to be granted by this provision. The sheet number 17 says, the assessing officer shall pass an order accepting or rejecting such application within a period of 1 month from the end of the month in which such application is received. So assessing officer has been given time limit that within 1 month from the end of the month in which it is received. So say for example, by 31st December, 2019, you have received the assessment order giving rise to this penalty. Then by the end of the month, 1 month from the end of that month, that is before 31st January 2020, you have to make an application. You have to make an application for immunity under 271AA. You have to pay the tax. In assessing officer, if he receives by on 31st December, then by 28th September 2020, he has to pass the order either accepting or rejecting this application. However, in the interest of national justice, no order rejecting application shall be passed by the assessing officer unless assessing officer has been granted opportunity of being that does not require any elaboration. The order of assessing officer under this section shall be final and effect of 270 and accepting the application. No appeal under 246A or application for revision shall be admissible against the order of assessment, because ultimately you have no grievance. Whatever grievance is there, you have paid the money, you have paid the tax, and you are given immunity from penalty and prosecution. So there cannot be any grievance to you. And therefore, friends, all other the provisions which are there, which I have pointed out, I think it is there. But now what is important is analysis. Now let us closely look at this provision, because a number of things requires to be examined before availing this benefit. In case penalty under unreported income, which is not a consequence of misreporting, is bound to grant immunity subject to the fulfillment of a condition. Now what this means, this provision 270 capital A is applicable only if it is there is a penalty qua the unreported income simpliciter. If there is a penalty on unreported income by way of a misreport, then you cannot avail the immunity under 270 capital AA. So you have to be sure that the penalty which has been initiated by the assessing officer is qua the unreported income simpliciter and not MRI. If there is a MRI, then you cannot avail the benefit of immunity under section 270 AA. It appears that where the penalty is levied under certain addition on the ground of misreporting and certain additions on the ground of unreporting, then assess. Now why I am giving this posture, what I have in mind is this, that suppose there is an addition of 10 lakhs rupees resulting into an unreported income. Now this unreported income of 10 lakhs I divide into two parts, 5 lakhs, 5 lakhs, 5 lakhs some URI simpliciter and 5 lakhs MRI. Now if I want to avail the benefit of 270A, I cannot avail because a component of the URI is a MRI. So if there is a hodgepodge of MRI, URI and MRI, I cannot go to the immunity provisions of 270 capital A. The only recourse available to me would be to prefer an appeal or go for a revision under section 264. That is, I think, a very difficult situation, because when there are two things, you cannot go. Now, another aspect that would arise out of this common would be that, take for example, the assessment order, you have to make an appeal about the assessment order. Now, therefore, you cannot bifurcate the assessment order into two parts. That the assessment order qua the URI, I will go for the immunity, and qua the MRI, I will go for appeal. Because the section 270 capital A says that you should not file appeal against the order of assessment. So you are barred against filing the appeal itself. The entire assessment order cannot be subject matter of appeal before CITA under 264A, 246A. And therefore, friends, this provision requires, I think, some amendments to give a further benefit to the assessee. The third issue is this, that there is no provision for condonation of delay. Suppose I fail to make an application within the time prescribed of 1 month. What will happen? I don't know whether the extension of time given by the Honorable Finance Minister in this circular, probably Mr. Jani Bhai would be able to give the reply, whether this extension of all those things which have been given by the Honorable Finance Minister in his first circular or instruction, whether if I am failed to make an application because I had received the order in the month of February, it was on net or if physical was given in the month of February 2020, and I had a time, but by that time on 24th or earlier that there was a lockdown, 24th March. So I could not make an application. Now, whether this would be covered by this extension of time granted by the Honorable Finance Minister, that will have to be considered. Now, friends, the issues which I have discussed, they are all there. And the bullet is very important. The last bullet says that CBDT has issued a very beneficial circular, that if you opt for the immunity under 270, or rather immunity under 270 capital AA, then it would not amount to admission so far as the subsequent year or other years are concerned, unreported income. That is, if the additions are made, it would not amount to admission, that additions in the subsequent year. Take, for example, additions are made qua 14A, and you don't prefer an appeal, you go for 270 capital A. Now, in that case, in the year number 2, that is in assessment year 18-19, the assessing officer cannot come out with a plea that if for 17-18 you had gone for 270 capital A, AA, and therefore here you cannot dispute it. So this is a very benevolent circular which you have to consider. Now I come to the provisions. I think it is 612. Yes. Now the first is, I think the first two, the posers which I have raised, they are very debatable provisions. And after having the entire of the provisions in depth, now you have to answer it, that whether the penalty under section 270 capital A through things is automatic, whether it is mandatory. Secondly, is there any discretion? Next is there any satisfaction to be recorded by the assessing officer or the concerned authority before initiating the penalty under section 270 capital A? Now let me take each of the situations separately. Now first is the three authorities. As you know, this provision starts with may direct. So I had at the initial stage emphasis the two expressions may. The three authorities may and direct. Now let us expand these two expressions. Now these three authorities are the authorities who can impose the penalty. Assessing officer will impose the penalty when he finds during the course of assessment proceedings that there is an unreported income. Similarly, CIT appeals can initiate the penalty and impose the penalty if he comes to know that there is an unreported income. Now such situation will arise that when you have filed an appeal before CIT appeals makes an enhancement, and qua enhancement he comes to he gives a direction that the penalty under section 270 capital A should be levied. Directions can be given, but how this work, the computation provisions would be worked out. Now go step by step. The CIT appeals has given a direction that out of the 20 lakhs rupees assessment was made, which has resulted into 10 lakhs rupees by way of unreported income. That is 10 lakhs returned income, 20 lakhs unreported assessed income. Now he enhances to 25 lakhs. So 5 lakhs rupees is the enhancement qua that 5 lakhs rupees. He treats as an unreported income, and he gives a direction that that is to be treated as an URI and penalty is to be levied under 270 capital A. But the question will be how this will be worked out, because the first is that if you in entire provisions of 270 capital E, there is no machinery provision by which the CIT appeals can give the effect to this direction. From 20 to 25 lakhs it has increased, but on 5 lakhs rupees, the first question is what is the last assessed income? That has to be seen. Suppose some 154 is made. The order which you had appealed against was the 3-3 order where it was an income of 20 lakhs. As a result of 154, it is reduced to 18 lakhs. Now, CIT appeals would start from 20 lakhs, or if you go by the subsection 2, then he will have to go from section 20, the assessed income of 20 lakhs and not 18 lakhs. And secondly, the second would be the second is that section 274 subsection 3, I think that can come to the rescue of the assessing officer, because what I feel is that subsection 3 provides for the procedure for levy of penalty under this chapter 20, this is chapter 21, which includes 270 capital A. Now it says that an income tax authority on making an order under this chapter, that is the chapter 21, which includes 270 capital A, imposing a penalty. So CIT appeals makes an order imposing a penalty. Unless he himself is the assessing officer, shall forthwith send a copy of such order to the assessing officer. So what I feel is that the CIT appeals will pass an order, that is the order under section 270A read with section 251, and he will give a copy to the assessing officer, and assessing officer will work out the unreported income and the computation of the penalty by giving effect to the order of the CIT appeals. So that appears to be the I think that appears to be the effect of these three authorities. Similarly, the principal CIT or CIT. Say for example, CIT passes the order under section 263, and which does not limit to the giving directions to the assessing officers to make a de novo assessment as per the directions given in order of revision under 263. But he comes to the conclusion that there is the order of the assessing officer is erroneous and prejudicial to the interest of the revenue qua this amount, and that you should make an assessment by making an addition towards the, say, unsecured creditors or so other these additions and disallowances. Now that can be subject matter of penalty under section 270A, and here also I think the same procedure will have to be followed. The CIT or PRCIT will issue a notice under 274. He will pass an order under section 263 read with 270 capital A, and copy will be sent to the assessing officer, and he will give an effect to this order. Now the question is but the other important aspect that I have to discuss is whether it is automatic. Now friends, this is a very difficult thing because the section uses the word may. It says the assessing officer so and so may during the course of any assessment proceedings. Now the use of the word may has been given when it comes to the penal provisions, either under section 271(c) or other provisions, that and that landmark decision of Hindustan Steel 83 ITA 23 is a starting point, Magna Carta, from where everyone goes and discusses that the penalty is not automatic merely because it is lawful to do so. The assessing officer will not impose a penalty. That is the ratio of that decision. But friends, I think looking to the entire scheme, is it possible to give a different interpretation to this word may? Now here, I think I may rely upon two things. One, the legislative intention. In my first slide, therefore, I had reproduced what is the legislative intention behind enactment of a new turf. So now we are playing on a new turf. You have to go back to the old provisions of 271C, where the starting point was the assessing officer is satisfied that the assessee has concealed the incomes or furnished inaccurate particulars of income. So the word was satisfied, and that satisfied, as I will come to later on, had also a subject matter of interpretation. And the assessing officer was required to prove that there is a concealment of income or furnishing of inaccurate particulars of income. Now in the present provisions, there is an arithmetical formula. Once there is a variation between the assessed income and returned income, there is an unreported income and the next step follows. So whether the penalty is automatic or not, I think one will have to make a serious consideration. In second aspect, if you are aware about this old scheme of the block assessment in case of a search cases, that is 158 BC and BD, there is a provision under 158 BFA 2, and in subsection 2 it says that when there is an assessment of an undisclosed income which exceeds the undisclosed income which you have disclosed in the return file in response to 150 BBC notice, then that would be subject matter of penalty. Now, BBFA 2 had come up for consideration before our Honorable Gujarat High Court. Myself and respected Shri Saurabh Bhai, if he's there, then he would recollect that I had argued in case of Bhogilal Murchan, and then he carried the matter further in Becher Das Parmar 341 ITR 499. And there, the Honorable Court said that look, even though because the word used in BFA 2 is made, the penalty is not automatic, even though the difference between the assessed undisclosed income and returned undisclosed income has to be assessed. And therefore, and if I refer to this Becher Das Parmar's decision, I can take a benefit that it is not automatic, and still you have to prove that something more is required. But friends, this decision, if you read carefully in the paragraph, then it says that even though it is not automatic, but the benefit of the bona fide belief and all other things would not be admissible to the SSC. So may is there.
So Soparkar,
pardon?
So Soparkar sir is with us. Sir,
Yeah.
you want to add anything, sir? He was raising hands.
No,
Sir,
no,
please.
no.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes. So friends, what I am trying to point out is this, that the penalty in view of this decision of Becher Das Parmar, if I feel that the scheme is peri materia with 158 BBFA 2, then friends, I think the penalty is discretionary and it cannot be levied. But friends, if I once again go to the ratio of the Dharmendra textile, you will say that how far it is a good law and how far it should be considered. It is a different question. But some part of it has been considered in Rajasthan textiles case subsequently by Honorable Supreme Court, and says that when the method shows the objects, the scheme and others, that it is a civil liability, then there is a penalty is automatic and you cannot have a discretion. So friends, the discretion is with regard to initiation or whether discretion is with regard to the quantum of penalty. All those aspects we'll have to consider. And one more decision you can consider is Delhi High Court decision and reported in 336 ITR page 8, where also this block assessment penalty was subject matter of consideration. And the same view was taken that it is not automatic. Now I come to the another aspect, the word direct. you will notice that the word satisfied is absent in this subsection 1 of 270 capital A. Now, what are the implications of this absence of this word subsection, the satisfaction? The first is that this 270 capital A only requires a directions from the concerned authority. That means there should be a clear-cut direction in the order giving rise to the penal provisions. Say, for example, if it is an assessment order, then the assessing officer must give a clear and in unequivocal terms, in an unambiguous manner, a direction that the provisions of 270 capital A are attractive. And not only that, the assessing officer will have to give a direction that whether it is a case of an unreported income simpliciter or a misreporting of income. Why I say so? That if the clear-cut directions are not given, then in case of that ambiguity, the entire order will fail or collapse, and that order, the penalty will have to be quashed, because the assessing officer is required to give a finding, because the onus of proving for the unreported is different. So that I will elaborate it while I will come to 270 capital A 9. So the point is that there should be a direction. Now let us take the old provisions under section 270 capital A, 270(1)(c). In that case, the discrepancy, rather the controversy started from Delhi High Court decision that if there is a observations that initiate the penalty under section 271(c), then that is not a satisfaction, and therefore the penalty is liable to be quashed. Therefore, the provisions were amended, and subsection 1 capital V was introduced, that is 271 into bracket capital 1 capital V was there, and a deeming provision was introduced that even when a direction is contained in the assessment order, that would be sufficient to be a satisfaction on part of the assessing officer that there is a default, either of concealment of income or furnishing of inaccurate particulars of income. So the expression satisfaction is deemed to be satisfied if there is a direction, but the direction has to be specific. At the same time, it requires that direction has to be specific. A general direction, as I said just now, will not be sufficient to uphold this penalty order. Now that you can get a support from the celebrated decision of Manjunath Cotton 359 ITR 565. I think every difficulty has started with this decision. Now this decision is in favor of the SSE, and much water has passed, not in Gujarat, but outside Gujarat, and all tribunals are following this Manjunath Cotton, and whenever there is no direction or no specific direction, no satisfaction, then this penalty is being quashed under 271(1)(c) by following this decision of 359 ITR. Now the question arises whether this decision is still a good law for 270 capital A. Now friends, I would like you to refer to the paragraph number 59 and 49 and 50 of this decision. Now, if you refer to these paragraphs, then you will also find that the Honorable Court has stated that the penalty is not automatic merely because it has resulted to any addition or the disallowance. The penalty cannot be imposed under section 270(1)(c) unless there is a concealment of income or furnishing of inaccurate particulars of income. So if I, not exact words, but the substance of that paragraph is there. Paragraph number 36 says, if the levy of penalty is not a matter of course, it has to be found that the SSE has concealed any income. The mere addition to the taxable income would not automatically lead to penalty. And the ratio is in the next paragraph. if from the scheme, objects and words used in the statute, it appears that the proceedings for imposition of the penalty are adjudicatory in nature and not quasi-criminal, then the penalty would be automatic. Then paragraph number 49. Thus, the provision is attracted once in any such assessment order, a direction for initiation of penalty proceedings under 270(11)(c) is made. So the provision is attracted once a direction is there in the assessment order. Further, therefore, if it means if the order does not contain specific finding, if the mere direction the procedure is found in the assessment order, then legal fiction, even if is deemed to constitute it will not be constitute a satisfaction. So if mere words are penalty proceedings are being initiated separately, that would not be a proper direction. And as per paragraph 50 of that decision, the penalty is liable to be quashed. So friends, these are all provisions which I think you will have to consider for coming to the conclusion whether it is a direction is the condition of direction is satisfied or not. But I personally feel that the direction has to be direction has to be there, and that direction has to be specific in unequivocal terms, unambiguous words, whether it is unreported income or misreported income, because your reply would be different, the penalty would be different, and therefore, unless it is there, I think this condition is not satisfied, and the penalty order is liable to be quashed. With this, I think I will be completing the discussion so far at subsection 1, or the poser number 2 at the page 19 is given. Now, the next poser is whether issue of show cause notice is mandatory for levying penalty under 270A. Now, this, even the section, I think subsection 12 itself says that subsection 12 of section 270 capital A itself says that the penalty referred to in subsection 1 shall be imposed by the assessing officer in writing so and so, as it says this may be. And secondly, 274 is also made applicable because 274 is applicable to the entire chapter 21, which the penalty 270 capital A forms part of it. So I feel that the show cause notice is mandatory. And as the second part of this poser, that in this cause notice fails to specify URI and MRI, it would be fatal. Certainly, it would be fatal, and such a show cause notice is liable to be quashed. I have not yet come across in those assessment orders passed for 17-18, where additions have been made either under 1158BE or otherwise, that strictly the assessing officer have followed the procedure of 270 capital A. Therefore, whenever you prefer an appeal against, or whether when you give a reply to this, the reply to the notice issued under section 274, I think you will have to be very specific by raising a contention that how the penalty proceedings are illegal by referring to these directions and the specific directions. Then friends, next contention, the poser is that can penalty under 270A can be levied on incorrect legal claim or debatable issue. Now friends, let me take you on to the background of this provision. As I was discussing, while discussing subsection 6 of 270 capital A, I had pointed out that there are 4 situations where the assessing officer will not consider the unreported income as a part of the unreported income. That means those additions or disallowance would be excluded from the difference of the unreported income, and therefore relief would be given to you. Now, the first of its kind, as I discussed to you, was that when you give an explanation and that explanation is found to be bona fide and all material facts are to substantiate their explanations are given. Now friends, this is a very important escape route so far as 270 capital A is concerned. You have to take you to the old law as applicable to the explanation 1 and in clause B, that when, because all time we were used to try to quash the penalty on this ground, that I have offered an explanation, this explanation is bona fide, that means it is genuine, and secondly, I have been able to substantiate this explanation. Therefore, when you are confronted with this situation, you keep in proceedings and the penalty proceedings are distinct and separate. So merely because some addition has been made in the assessment proceedings, which has given rise to the unreported income, that doesn't mean that during the penalty proceedings you cannot produce a further evidence. That means during the penalty proceedings, you can produce a further confirmations, affidavits of the party to whom you had given the commission income, or this, if the cash credit is subject matter of addition, all those things can be given. And then assessing officer will have to apply his mind that whether this clause is applicable on account of fulfillment of bona fide, the belief, bona fide explanation, and you are able to substantiate these explanations. Friends, this assumes very much importance in this wise also, that very recently, Honorable Supreme Court, in the case of Bashir Ahmed, that is Bashir Ahmed Sisodia, which is delivered, decision is delivered on 24th April 2020. Very interestingly, the additions were made in the quantum order in respect of the cash credit, that is the sundry creditors, to be precise. Now, during the penalty proceedings, the SSA gave further evidence. This further evidence was examined by the assessing officer in the remand proceedings, and in this remand proceedings, the assessing officer gave a clean sheet that I am satisfied and these additions are not warranted. Now, as the luck would have been of the assessing, when the matter came up after losing at all the lower levels, when the matter came to the Honorable Supreme Court, the Honorable Supreme Court take note of this additional matter, the other evidence, that look, the assessing officer in the remand proceeding itself has deleted the penalty. And as a result, the entire addition was knocked down by the Honorable Supreme Court in this quantum appeal. So if that is the case, then friends, when a penalty proceedings comes, in order to avail the escape route of this subsection 6, you should produce additional evidence and to take your case within the four corners of bona fide explanation and the explanation being substantiated by the evidence. Therefore, friends, what I was dealing, the second is, as I go further, the clause C of this subsection 6 says that if the unreported income is on account on the basis of an estimate, and that estimate is a variation between the estimate of the assessee and estimate of the assessing officer, then qua that incremental estimation, the amount would not be considered as an unreported income. So if I have made a disallowance under 14A of 1 lakh, the assessing officer makes a disallowance under 14A of rupees 2 lakhs, then that incremental disallowance of 1 lakh rupees will not be treated as an unreported income. Friends, you should take a clue that whenever you are filing the return, whatever expenses you feel that they are nature of personal expenditure, or you are not able to substantiate it by any evidence, you should suo motu make some disallowance in the returned income itself. Now, if that is the case, it will take your case to the clause C of subsection 6 of 270A, and that will absorb you from the penalty by not being an unreported income. So that, I think, the return, while preparing the return of income, you should keep in mind that whatever these levels could be made on the basis of estimate, which you are going to come across at the time of assessment, you should make it at the time of assessment itself. That would absolve you from the penalty by resorting to 271C. Now, with this background, let me come to these poser number 4 and 5. Incorrect illegal claim and debatable issue. Now, incorrect legal claim. Here, one has to be very sure what is the legal claim. Legal claim is incorrect legal claim means if there is an express provision to disallow that expenditure and you have not made. Say, for example, in case of PwC's case, the PF contribution was required to be disallowed in view of the remark made by the auditor that it was not a recognized PF, and therefore it was required to be disallowed. And you have not disallowed. Now, can you say that now under the new turf, this would be outside the 270A by taking a recourse to the subsection 6? I think the answer would be very difficult. If you come to the conclusion that clauses mentioned in subsection 6 is not exhaustive, but only illustrative, they are giving only examples of what could be excluded from the unreported income, then only you will get out from the incorrect legal claim. Otherwise not. Because if, I think there could be two opinions on it, whether these 4 clauses, the subsection 6, the illustrations are exhaustive or illustrative or exhaustive. One view could be that when you are given the situations that which would exclude from something, say for example, you come across a board that you park your vehicle, even a mall, that you park your vehicle at your own cost and risk. The mall is not liable for the loss of your vehicle or some damage is done to your vehicle when you park in a mall or a club. Now, this is an exclusion clause from that liability. Now, when there is an exclusion clause, this is something which is a exhaustive thing, and therefore you cannot enlarge it by telling that it is an illustrative thing. So, a view is taken that it is exhaustive, then this would be out of the purview of the exclusion from the unreported income and penalty may be attracted. The second part
Samir,
yeah.
Samir bhai, can we keep 50 minutes for question answer?
No, definitely I will conclude it within a short time because 271D I will take 10 minutes.
Okay, no problem.
I will skip over this 270 and because 270D I know that it is 643. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, within 15 minutes, I will just go across, go and finalize it. But because these are the routine disallowances which will be made and you will come across it, therefore I am taking a longer time while explaining 278.
No problem.
Debatable issue. Now, debatable issue. Now, what is debatable issue? That is also to be examined in the context of the facts and circumstances of the case. You cannot give a blanket answer to this that whenever there is a debatable issue, then you will be out of the penalty. Then the last is agreed addition. Now, friends, on agreed addition, you know that after Shadilal Sugar Mills, you have 2 decisions, KP Madhusudan and MEC data. Now, agreed addition, I think I will have to develop it that under what circumstances it is made. If you are falling in the situations covered by MEC data, then you are out. Because in MEC data, there was a survey. That return was filed after survey, that income was not disclosed, even after the assessee was cornered, and then he came out with a plea that I want to buy peace and I offer this income. If these are the gross situation, then and even otherwise, 270A, agreed addition. Now, what type of agreed addition? Qua expenditure or qua income? That you have to be examined. If it is an income, when the case would fall under misrepresentation or suppression of facts. Say, for example, agreed addition is qua 68, 69. Then what will happen? So one will have to answer this question keeping in mind the nature of addition. Now, merely because there is an agreed addition, you will not get out from the penalty as per the old provision. So you are not playing on the old turf. Now you will have to adjust your playing style. That this turf is taking very spin like Shane Warne. So you have to be a Tendulkar and take a position and just play the innings. So that is how you have to take it. Now, in a hurried manner, I will go to the 270AA-D. That is my slide number 22. Now, I just give you a glimpse of this provision. Now, this is a new, has been inserted by this 2020 finance bill. I think this will play a havoc. It reads like this: without prejudice to any other provisions of this act. Now mark each and every word of this provision. Without prejudice to any other provisions of this act. So it overrides all the provisions of this act and says, if during any proceedings under this act, next, it is found, that means there has to be finding. What finding? That in the books of accounts maintained by any person. So the important words are in the books of accounts maintained by any person, not the SSC itself. So any person, there is a false entry, first situation, first entry. An omission of an entry which is relevant for computation of total income of such person to evade tax. Now there are two parts to it, keep in mind. In the books of accounts maintained by any person, there is a false entry. That is one thing. False entry means that it has been defined, which in a subsequent explanation. The second situation, omission of any entry which is relevant for computation of income. So then which is relevant, not every entry, which is relevant for computation of income of such person. And the intention is to evade the tax liability. So I find that there are two parts. One is commission of an offense, that is a false entry in books of accounts, that is commission of an offense. And second is omission of an offense, that is omission of an entry. So you all together omit an entry. And what was that entry? That entry was relevant for your computation of income. And you have omitted with that intention to evade any tax liability. Now here mark word tax liability. Which tax liability? Under income tax law or any other provisions, I don't know. The assessing officer may direct that such person shall pay by way of penalty and a sum equal to aggregate amount of such false or omitted entry. So when there are only false entry, the quantum of penalty would be the amount or the entire value of the false entry. If there is a then the value of that omission entry. If there are both, then A plus B, false entry plus omission entry, that aggregate would constitute the amount of penalty under this provision. Now another hardships, the subsection 2 says, without prejudice to the provisions of subsection 1, the assessing officer may direct that any other person who causes the person referred to in subsection 1 in any manner to make a false entry. Now here who is covered? Any other person who causes the person, the first person in subsection 1, to make this false entry or makes an omission. So a person who causes the first person to make commission or omission of an offense, he is also covered. And he would be liable to penalty by way of sum equal to aggregate. So if now friends, pausing for a moment for 2 minutes, this provision was inserted with a view that number of false, the bogus ITC credit were taken in a GST provision. Now the fault was lying in a GST provision. To remedy the situation of availing bogus cash input credit in a GST provision, a provision is introduced in the income tax rate. Now I think this is for the first time, apart from 43B deductions, that there is a provision under the income tax law which will penalize you for your default under GST provision. And not it is limiting to GST bogus IC credit, but it is enlarging the provision. Any false entry in what? Any person. Now if I just develop it, then it would be who will initiate the penalty? Who would be your assessing officer? who will say that I have found that you have maintained books of accounts and there is a false entry. When subsection 2 will consider, suppose A of Ahmedabad faces an entry of purchase of raw material and it is found that they are bogus bills. Now these bogus bills are issued by B of Bangalore. He says that I have taken a B from C for Calcutta. Now in subsection 2, this B of Bangalore and C of Calcutta would be covered. Now who will assess that B of Bangalore and C of Calcutta? Whether A of Ahmedabad? A of Ahmedabad will give a finding, or a finding given in A of Ahmedabad would be binding to B and C. How the opportunity of hearing would be given to B and C. How the right of cross-examination will be given to B and C. All other issues would be there. The second would be if I am not maintaining books of accounts or my books of accounts are rejected and there is an entry. Or take a case that I am maintaining books of accounts but I am filing the return under 44 AD. That is in a presumptive provision. Then what will happen? All those situations will arise. And I think the last part is the explanation. False entry, it says, false entry includes, so it's an inclusive provision. And what follows, I think that is most damaging. Use or intention to use. I find for the first time, not a commission of an offense, but a preparation for the offense is made an equal pedestal to the commission of an offense. If you keep a knife in your house and it would be found that you are preparing for the commission of an offense by murder, it is like that. Now in intention to what? Three things. The first is forge or falsified documents. Now examples are given of a false. So first is forged or falsified documents. Second is invoice in respect of supply of goods or services to any person without actual supply. And last is invoice by a person from a person who is not existent. To put it in short, the first situation is that the false or forged or false documents are there. So you are holding a bill. Say for example, bill is there, LR is there, but they are found to be forged or falsified documents. Then it would be covered in clause A. Second situation is invoices are such where there is an invoice, but there is no receipt of such goods. So there is you justify it by the bills, but there is no receipt of goods. You have taken goods from A, but you are having the bills and the LR from B. Now, if there is a goods have been received from B and you are having the LR and the invoices of A, then that would be covered under B. Then C, invoice in respect of both which are of non-existent person. So everything is correct. You are having an invoice of A, then it is a person who has supplied the goods is A, but that person is not existent. Then what will happen? At what point of time he will be not existent? When it will be considered it is not existent? Who will give a finding that he is not existence? Say for example, 133(6) have been received back for non-service, and all other things are there. He had died in between period. He was in existence in 2007 financial year 2021, but by corona yesterday he died it, just like our friend Mr. Vasa, he died it. Then what will happen? Suppose some legal bills are there of the consultation, and he is not in existence, and so you will make an addition. I am not able to substantiate it. So this is all. I think it's such a thing that I will have to spend 15 or 20 minutes on it, but I will just stop it and I will just revert to the queries, because this is the provision which I think the chamber must make a representation. Because the last point is, if I take it to this analysis, I have taken it that this is not the penalty for in personnel, but is a penalty in rem. And second is there could be a double penalty under 270 capital A, because I left it while discussing 270 capital A subsection 9, that there is a failure to record any receipt in books of accounts. So omission of an entry. Now word omission and failure are different. Then third is the recording of a false entry in books of accounts, that is covered under 270A. Now 270 capital A is an old provision, but this 270 capital A says without prejudice to all other provisions under the Act. So whether two penalties would be levied, and I can give a computation that under GST provisions, there are already if I understand correctly, there are 112, section 112 provides that penalty would be imposed if there is the input credit is not available to you. But they are meager penalty. Then why you are not amending the GST provision? A person would be liable to penalty if I if I give it in a nutshell, within a minute, if I calculate amount equal to the invoice. Suppose invoice is of ₹100, then you will be liable to penalty of 100. The person who has issued the invoice, then you will be liable to another ₹100. If 270 capital A is to be made liable, then the difference 100 would be misrepresentation of income. So it will be 500% of the tax payable. So all the four would be something like 200 or more than 200. You will be paying by way of penalty under 270 AAD, read with 270 subsection 9. I think these are the provisions. I think we must take it before the higher forum and make a solution to it, because this is not limited to the GST provision, and in GST there was no need actual, or I think your disease is in GST. Why you are giving the pills to the person who is income tax officer? How income tax officer will come to know that this is a bogus bills unless making an allegation? And what a onus lies upon the assessing officer to prove it. All those situations will we have to consider. Thank you, friends.
Sir.
I will have to sum up it up because I am already 3 minutes short of the 6 or 7 o'clock. So
Thank you.
I throw
Sir,
the entire forum open for the discussion and question answer.
So due to the lack of time, meeting may be getting time barred at 7, sir. If you can allow me to go for the vote of thanks first, Chairman.
And you may do one thing. You may invite the queries on email, your mail of the treasurer or the vice president, whoever you deem fit, and then you may just forward it to me as far as possible whenever the facts are clear and law unambiguous.
Yeah.
To give it.
Bhavya, give my email ID to all the friends, participants, bbpatel&company@yahoo.com.
Sir, I have compiled the question. I am sending it to you. I have compiled it already. Fine. Sir, should I request Akshat Bhai to give the vote of thanks? Sir?
Yeah. Please, Akshat Bhai.
Just a minute. Akshat Bhai.
Good evening, all seniors and friends. It is really pleasure to hear learned advocate Samir Divetia sir. Respected Samir Jani sir, respected Bhaskar Bhai Patel, my friend who just left because of the prayer, Varish Isani, my younger brother like Kuntal. I'm very happy to be with you here and extremely happy to have some pearl of wisdom from learned speakers. Sir, it is very nice to listen you always, and thank you all participant and learned speaker for joining us. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Over to Chairman, sir. If any announcement is to be made. Thank you.
No announcement. Only the queries. If it can be dealt with within stipulated time, the speaker is requested to give the reply. Otherwise, we'll obtain from the participants, and then after we'll get it done through the speaker.
Okay, I'm going on to the first query, sir.
Okay.
The first query is penalty under section 270A and 271 AAC can be initiated and levied collectively.
270 AA C.
270A and 271 AAC.
AAC.
Yeah.
270 AAC, if you recollect, 270AAC is in respect of the additions made qua 68 to 69, governed by 115 BBE. And there is a subsection that no penalty under 270 capital A shall be imposed upon the assessee in respect of income referred to in 1. So 1 refers to those 68 to 69D read with 115 BBE, and therefore qua those items of addition there cannot be double penalty.
Thank you. So the next question is, it would be advisable or prudent to disallow certain portion of various expenses like hotel expense, traveling, local conveyance as a small percentage of expense or a round figure?
Certainly. If you want to take your case to the 270A capital 6 clause C, then certainly you have to make a disallowance on ad hoc basis and let the assessing officer make an upward division. And when he makes an upward division, the incremental amount, the difference amount is there. That would be subject matter of the variation between this assessed income and returned income. And in that case, it will not be liable to penalty.
Thank you. So should I continue with 7?
Is it just the last query?
Okay, I would take the last query. So the question is, we have shown agriculture income, and we had also shown the expenses at 30% of the gross agriculture income. The assessment officer, the assessing officer has estimated the agriculture expense at 40%. Now the question is, in this case, it would be an underreport. It would be treated as underreporting or misreporting. And what would be the status of penalty under section 278?
Let me point out from the facts which you have narrated that you have been able to justify the amount of income, agriculture income, correct? Now, if you have produced the bills for agriculture produce you have sold, and you have also maintained the bills for the agriculture expenses. Now, if the assessing officer made an estimate and determine the income, then you will fall under clause B of subsection 6 of section 270 capital A, because your assessment is made on estimate basis. But the difficulty is that it is not on account of rejection of your books of accounts, but if it is of method of accounting, then you would be excluded from the unreported income. I think it would be a difficult case to get out from 270 capital A unless I give an interpretation to subsection 6 that it is an illustrative situations, not exhaustive situations, that all the 4 situations given in subsection 6 are illustrative. Even other situations would be covered by subsection 6, and in that case, it would not be unreported income, and you will be not liable to penalty. But it will be a matter of debate. Just like 270(11)(c), one cannot say. Or if you take out the case under clause A, you offer an explanation that, look, these are the expenses which are supported by vouchers, but you are making an estimate. So, and my explanation is supported by the explanation and with it is substantiated by the bills and vouchers. Then I think you will cover under clause A of subsection 6, and that will enable you to get out from the unreported income and from the penalty under 270 capital A. So that could be the escape route if you of the explanation, but not of an estimated, merely because estimate is not covered under subclause C of that type of estimate.
Okay, we close for that.
Okay, sir.
Clause C, B and C. B is with regard to method of accounting and C is with regard to upward revision. So both the clauses of subsection 6 are not covered by the situation which you have narrated. It could only be under A, if at all it is to be there. And misreporting is not there because your vouchers are not found to be false. It is not a case of misrepresentation or suppression of facts from the facts you have narrated. If the bills of agriculture expenses or agriculture produce sale bills are found to be false, you have not sold to the APC the agriculture produce because on cross verification there is found that the bills are false, then it will be a misrepresentation under clause 9, subsection 9 of 270A, that is a misreporting, and penalty would be levied. I hope I am clear.
Thank you. Thank you, Samir bhai. Bhavi bhai, we end the meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.